about the cell and gene space from JP Morgan this year. I mean, what do you guys think? Was that, a good takeaway for anybody that attended or have been hearing some news from it?
From what I've been hearing, definitely there was a more positive environment. And I actually think it's important that we acknowledge and say it because it feeds into itself, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's because if it wasn't true, then okay, let's deal with it some other way. But if it is true, even if it is a glimpse of it, let's reinforce it because it will have good impact in the field, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely
Yeah.
agree. I mean, we heard exactly the same. So there is optimism. And I think it even started before JP Morgan. I think at Jefferies, I think there were a lot of meetings, a lot of pharma, a lot of VCs, and they were all willing to look for the next deal, right?
Yeah.
I think there's definitely positivity. I think it's compared to last year when we were trying to convince ourselves that it was getting better. There was we were talking ourselves up a lot and trying to really goad ourselves into, yeah, it's going to be better. The sun's coming out and all that. Now it definitely felt like things are moving in the right direction, but I think that direction's not what it used to be. It's very much more a sober realism that things are going to change, but they're not going to go back to the way they were.
Interesting.
Ingrid, what about you guys? Did you guys find it was easy to get meetings? Did you find that there was a lot of engagement?
I can wear two hats to answer that question, and I think both would be yes. It is JP Morgan is always a very active time, and I think we always come out of it with some level of positivity. To be fair, I think it is always a good start of the year. Everyone feels very positive, and I just hope we can kind of keep up for the next 3 months and see if it holds up. Because I think last year that early enthusiasm wore off so quickly. And at least we're not seeing any signs of that going away right now. So it feels a bit
Yeah, I
better.
think that definitely. Carol, what about you? What was your experience on the ground?
Well, I thought there was a lot of positivity and optimism, which felt really good. I'm with you that people are looking at things through a lens of more realistic view. And I thought there were some interesting deals that have happened recently. I don't know what you guys think of the recent Solaris announcement. I think that's an interesting program and how that's going to roll out around the world.
Did that happen
Yeah, so,
after JP Morgan, right?
Yeah, after JP Morgan. So,
yeah, I think we didn't see quite as many deals announced at JP Morgan, and people started
yeah.
saying, is this a problem? Is this an issue? But at the end of the day, I think there was I don't know why they weren't announced. Maybe they hadn't been completed yet. These things often, what we're seeing is some of the deals are taking longer now. There's deeper, longer diligence that's happening. It's more easy to sometimes side rail some of these things. So I think the fact that there weren't big deals announced at JP Morgan probably isn't the end of the world. The fact that they were announced afterwards, and what we're looking for is a nice smooth run of deals to be announced rather than one-offs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People are busy during JP Morgan, right? They are there to meet other people. You couldn't expect them to be trying and do both at the same time.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the point. I think it's an incubator rather than a delivery place, right? So you're not going to see, I mean, you see some, but you hope to see a lot more being incubated and coming out of the discussions there. So that's how I see JP Morgan.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Okay, let's get into it. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see everyone and to have everyone join us online. This is the first session of 2026, and so welcome back to everyone for our first episode of this calendar year. We are extremely excited. It is now early February 2026, and the cell and gene therapy industry has just completed its most paradoxical year on record. On one hand, we've seen the mega rounds return. Billions are flowing into AI-branded companies and into in vivo platforms that promise to turn the body into its very own drug factory. On the other hand, however, we're witnessing a manufacturing valley of death. as multi-million-dollar autologous facilities risk becoming stranded assets in a shift towards decentralization. As we stand in early 2026, the cell and gene therapy sector is no longer just a promising frontier. It's now a high-speed execution engine. We've seen the very first wave of clinical successes in mass market indications like autoimmune and cardiometabolic diseases. But with that success comes a sobering reality check. The growth at any cost area or era of 2021 is a distant memory, and the funding winter of 2024 is finally thawing into a landscape defined by extreme bifurcation. Today, capital's flowing into massive mega rounds for in vivo and AI-driven platforms, whilst single asset startups face survival of the fittest environment. And we're facing that critical question: are the current investment maps a blueprint for a trillion-dollar industry, or are they creating bottlenecks that will starve the next generation of breakthroughs? We're no longer asking if these therapies work, we're asking if they can scale without breaking the bank. Today, our panel of architects and gatekeepers will debate whether the new investment map is a blueprint for global health, a breakthrough in financial engineering, or a bottleneck that will lock out the very best innovation that we came here to find. So let's follow the money. Joining me today are 83 facility members, Carol Houts and Miguel Forte, and alongside our invited guests, Laura Rodriquez and Ingrid Gafanhão. But before we get into the discussion with our esteemed panel, I'd like to take a second to thank our season sponsor, BCA Advanced Therapies Network. Really, without them, none of this would be possible. So if you are a company and a larger company, please consider supporting the 83 network so that we can continue to have these very cool conversations. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk first about capital efficiency versus capital abundance. So has the scarcity made us smarter? In the post-COVID capital drought, this forced companies to do more with less. This led some to look at ways of surviving with creative financing, leaner operations, and strategic partnerships, to mention a few. But has this constraint-driven innovation created a better foundation than the spray and pray era we saw during COVID? Miguel, I'm going to start with you. You've built companies in both the capital abundant and the capital scarce eras. So, time to be honest now. Did the flood of money in 2021 make entrepreneurs lazy and less disciplined? And how did that fight for every dollar that we're building fundamentally better companies, or are we just building them more slowly now?
Thanks, Sven. I mean, challenging as usual. I mean, let me just say before I go in that it's great to discuss this. It's great to be here, as you know, and really reflect on a mature field that needs to go to the next step. And yes, I think we have evolved from a time, let's call it abundance, not necessarily recklessness, but into a more sober environment, more realistic environment. You said it so, actually, just as we were chatting before coming in. I think we're seeing the companies trying to find alternative ways to fund, sometimes to survive, to get to a de-risked environment. And stage. I think what we're seeing in the evolution of the companies, the ones that get funded, it's probably a lowering of the level of the risk. So it's not smarter and better companies, but probably more de-risked companies in terms of what's being invested. That in itself is good because the rate of success, the ability to bring those products to patients in the near future is better. But my concern is if we do a lot of that, we do not take risks at earlier stage. We do not feed the pipeline. We need a large pipeline so that we can select the ones that are less risky down the road. And so we need to feed that. And I think the challenge is, how do we assess what is the risk level? What's the environment? How comfortable are investors on taking that bigger risk? So probably a few years ago, that abundance was a lower level risk, and today is a higher level risk. There's pros and cons about it, hopefully we'll continue to feed the pipeline, and for sure we'll get the products approved and continue to bring the maturity of the fields that you pointed out and I underscore as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Miguel. That's a really, really great start. So, Carol, let's move to you next. From a commercial and business development perspective, capital discipline over the last few years has changed how companies think about partnerships, timing, and where they place those big strategic bets. So in your experience, has the funding reset actually made companies more deliberate about how they align themselves with capital, both public, private, or strategic? Or are they seeing a lot more reactive capital chasing dressed up as strategy?
Mm-hmm. I'd say from our clients' perspective, we're seeing a lot of really hard work on the fundraising side. In the past, in 2021, for example, we had clients coming to us very early stage, like they had no clinical trials under their belt yet. And we were helping them with strategy and on the manufacturing side and so on, so they could do an IPO, within the next couple of months. That was kind of the environment, which we personally, coming from kind of biologics background, it seemed absolutely crazy to me that we were, operating in that sort of world. And I'd say now, we're providing a lot more information so that, we're essentially validating their investment thesis and the approach to CMC so that what they're reporting for capital needs is more accurate. We're also seeing a lot of creativity around how to get to manufacturing platforms that are more cost effective. People are not just going out and building infrastructure for the sake of building infrastructure now. It's, people are being very careful and deliberate about how they're approaching that. And one of the things we're also seeing is the academic centers out there really have matured their capabilities. At least many of them are clients of ours. I was on a panel yesterday and gave a talk at a conference where, Tatiana Matviva from, she's a core director at Beth Israel, which is under Harvard, very mature capabilities and strategic partnering with many sponsors. So I think that, being able to enable the academic centers early on, which, can be a springboard partnership for people in de-risking the landscape. And then, of course, just really being creative with how funds are used is what we're seeing.
Very, very interesting. And I'm so glad that I wasn't the only one in those days, looking at these companies that had literally just cured their first mouse and were prepping an IPO. It was surreal. And I started questioning my reality. So I'm so glad that you were in the crazy boat with me.
Absolutely.
Right. That's really, really fascinating. Thank you so much, Carol. Right. Laura, let's move over to you. So currently, as an investor, you are writing smaller checks into earlier stage companies, especially compared to some of your US-based colleagues and during COVID. Are you genuinely finding better risk-adjusted returns at seed and Series A? Or are you just making a virtue of necessity because the Series B and IPO markets are currently broken?
Good question, and thank you for having me here. So the short answer is we've always been early stage investors. This is a choice that is intentional, and we've been doing so for more than 10 years. And we really think that when you do early innovation, the value accrues. So firsthand, we focus on the problem that we need to solve, and addressing unsolved bottlenecks, it can really generate a lot of value. But also, I agree, capital efficiency is crucial, and we've exploited precisely the collaboration with research institutes and with hospitals to leverage research and manufacturing facilities. This meant that we could use non-dilutive funding to finance these companies. So apart from the equity that we invested, we raised non-dilutive funding, and we got much further. And in fact, we have some companies that with less than 10 million euros, they are generating clinical data. So this is even possible in the cell and gene therapy space. Maybe one important mention that we have in Spain, I think it's a very good instrument. We have an instrument that is public that co-invests with private investors. And the good thing is that it delegates the governance. So it increases the capital that you inject into the company without slowing down all the decision making. So really, when you mix private capital and public support, you can go further without raising super huge amounts. Then you have less dilution, cleaner structures, and stronger values. We really think that and we've seen most of our companies getting a values after our first investment. So we really think that early stage investment is here to stay, because more importantly, we are precisely feeding the pipeline that Miguel was mentioning, right?
Fantastic. Really, really fascinating. And I think this speaks to something that maybe we should discuss in a future session, about the really early support that we're seeing from certain governments. So the Spanish government is fantastic, Japanese government similar, and these countries that are providing these early stage support from a non-dilutive perspective. Absolutely agree. I think this is definitely the future to kickstart the area again. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura.
Would you allow me one just thing, very short?
For you, Miguel, anything.
I think in Europe, the European Commission with the Biotech Act and is really coming back with more intentions, more nimble about funding that can contribute to this perspective as well. So on that discussion, think about that element.
Wonderful. No, absolutely agree. Thanks, Miguel. Ingrid, let's move over to you. So thinking more about the public markets, the XBI is finally showing signs of life after years in the wilderness. And a little while ago, we crossed that magical 100 barrier, and I think we were sitting at about 124 yesterday. But are the public market investors actually rewarding capital efficient business models and disciplined execution? Or are we just seeing a rising tide lifting all boats again? And what would convince you that the sector has genuinely learned its lessons from before?
It's a very interesting question, actually. Sometimes I think the XBI doesn't reflect much of what we are thinking, right? It might tell you a story about maybe what is the risk appetite or what is kind of level of investments that is flowing back into healthcare from other sectors that it was before, let's say AI or tech or whatever that money was before. But it doesn't really tell you that discipline has been permanently internalized. So if I'm convinced that we have learned lessons, I would say probably not, because we have not yet seen durable performance through periods of high volatility. I'll turn the question back to any of you here. Would you tell me that we don't see any more biotech share price re-rating based on hype? I don't think we can say that we do. So I also don't think we can say we learned a lesson. I think if one day we can say that the winning companies and the winners are those that are very disciplined with their cash burn, have focused pipelines and very credible commercial paths, then maybe I can say that the lesson stuck, but it's not yet what I can confidently say that we see for biotechs. I want to see sustained valuation separation between companies that are truly good for the right reasons versus those that are just optimizing their storytelling for whatever the flavor of the month is. And I don't think I'm super confident to say that I see that just yet.
Fascinating. At the end of the day, I suppose we're all dealing with human beings here, and humans are flawed creatures at the best of times. Okay, really exciting. Great start. Thank you so much, everyone. Right, let's look at a slightly different angle to this, and let's look at where we're funding. And the geographical spaces. So Asian markets, particularly China and Japan, are becoming major players in the cell and gene therapy development and manufacturing space. European companies are facing different reimbursement and regulatory landscapes than US companies. So is capital flowing to where the best science is or where the best business models are? So Laura, let's start with you this time. Chinese biotech was and is the darling, and then it was a bit of a disaster story, and now it seems to be quietly, or maybe not so quietly, rebuilding with an incredibly cost-effective domestic focus. Are you and other VCs investing in Asia, advanced therapies companies at all right now? And if not, are you genuinely concerned about the quality in geopolitics, or are you just defaulting to the too hard to understand and missing opportunities like a lot of folks are?
I think we need to distinguish between where we invest and how we the risk. So in our case, our capital is European by nature. I mean, we need to deploy our capital in European-based companies. But that doesn't mean that we don't look into the whole space and try to track where science is moving faster. And the reality is that science is moving faster in China. I don't think we question quality anymore. And pharma is not questioning quality either. So what we are seeing is that many Western VCs are in licensing China assets and then building around them. So it's clearly something that is already happening. In our case, what we've done is we've used China to the risk. So for instance, in one of our companies, and I think you had Jean-Pierre in the last session with this Biotech, he proposed, let's do an investigator-initiated trial in China. For us, this was a first. And of course, it had a lot of nuances, but it was the way to get human data faster than our competitors that were mainly US companies, and also at a fraction of the cost because we didn't have that much funding. And we wanted to get, let's say, platform validation rather than commercial entry. And it worked quite well. And in fact, AstraZeneca acquired Biotech just after that. So maybe I also want to think that, or to use this as a call for action around where does Europe fit into everything, right? And I think we need to stay competitive. There is very good science in Europe as well. But the problem is that we are not flexible or fast enough, right? So maybe we should consider China as a collaborator, but also learn from them and try to be more pragmatic and less bureaucratic, right? And try to facilitate, for instance, phase ones. Maybe instead of going there, we could do it here faster. But of course, we need a lot of changes to make that happen.
Yeah, really, really insightful. And I think, Biotech is a fantastic example of being able to take good science, go over to China and be able to show that it works and then be able to come back. And I think, you raise a really good point about Europe and potentially even the US learning lessons about how do we move into first in human faster. We've seen Australia in the past years being able to start doing that and encouraging companies. But I think China has really just kickstarted that whole era. So really some great stuff to think about there. Carol, let's come over to you. Now, germ-free is working in regions like Saudi Arabia that are actively trying to attract advanced therapy investment through national strategies rather than individual assets, as we're tending to see in China. From your vantage point, what is different about doing business in these markets compared to the US or even Europe? And how should cell and gene therapies companies think about engaging with governments and sovereign capital that are explicitly trying to buy capability and not thinking about funding science? So totally different business model.
Yeah, no, that's a phenomenal question. I think countries like Saudi Arabia have really come out with incredible visions. So people have heard about Vision 2030, which is very much around technology capability and bringing that technology to the country, less dependence on oil and other economic pieces there. And then there's also the initiative around 2040, which is a complete focus on bringing biotechnology to the region. And it's very much seen through the lens of economics and the GDP benefits of bringing these technologies. And of course, on the biotechnology side of things, there's a lot of interest in being another location around the world that is a biotech center. the aspirations are to be another Cambridge slash, Boston or San Diego. And they're willing to put the initiative and the money behind it. And I think that's quite interesting. And they're really looking at their population. And one of the things that we have seen very remarkable is there's a lot of genetic disease in Saudi Arabia. Their patient population has a lot of needs for gene therapy. And they're prioritizing those therapeutic needs. They're prioritizing, the ability to manufacture themselves to offset costs of those therapies. And literally, it's at the highest level that this strategy has been rolled out. On the partnership side, partnering with these initiatives and so on gives companies access to the region as a whole, where I think that access is much limited today. Literally, the work we're doing with King Faisal will become a bridge or a gateway to the market for a lot of sponsor companies that want to engage and partner with Saudi Arabia on these very important fronts. We're also seeing some really great progress in South America. I don't want to ignore Brazil. There's big initiatives to control their costs. I think the social systems for delivering healthcare are driving this somewhat out of necessity. And we're seeing big steps being taken to, of course, manage those costs. But in Brazil, there's a constitutional mandate for patients to have the most advanced care. So it's really out of necessity. But now's the time to embrace working with governments around the world to advance these therapies and access specific markets of interest.
Yep.
Fascinating. And this also then speaks to some of the points we made earlier about government support for companies, just in a slightly different way. Really, really interesting. Thank you. So Miguel, let's move on to you. If you were going to be starting a new advanced therapy company today, would you still incorporate it in the US or Europe, or would you seriously consider an Asia first strategy with a later expansion to the West? So kind of flipping things on its head. What would drive your calculus and your decision making? Would it be things like government support, regulatory speed, manufacturing cost, patient access, or something completely different?
Yeah. Thanks again. And I think my answer needs to be the other side of the coin of what Laura said, right? You may wish to incorporate it in Europe or in the US, probably for reasons where the research started, and there's very strong research in Europe. But you will not be able to do business today ignoring China. You need to put that on your strategic decisions. And actually, I think that the geography of cell and gene therapy is changing, and we need to acknowledge it. China brings quality, innovation, and operational efficiency. But it doesn't mean that we should only go there. But actually, the ones that I'm involved with are in multiple ways, either thinking on collaborations or in establishing a presence there or creating a new co for collaboration. So clearly, the scene needs to consider China, and it's becoming more acceptable, definitely more rewarding, and Laura said that. But so it's unavoidable. It doesn't mean that you need to go there and just do it there. It doesn't mean that you need only to rely on their funding or their innovation, but actually collaborate. And I actually think this is essential for Europe in terms of a collaborative competition. We need to learn, collaborate, and keep our strengths and be part of the competition. If we compete ignoring, we'll lose. If we do not compete, we'll also lose. So we need to collaborate, and so China is part of the scenario.
Fascinating. Thank you, Miguel. And, as you were talking, what really struck me is, all of you talking very much about collaboration and working cross borders and things like this. And this is almost completely opposite to the political message we're hearing from around the world, which is very much moving inwards and looking inwards. And yet here we are looking outwards and trying to collaborate. So I would like to think that biotech is setting a better example than the politicians currently around the world. So maybe we need to teach them a thing or two.
It's
Okay,
an
Ingrid,
example
let's
of
move.
necessity, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, necessity and hopefully more better friendliness. So let's move on without becoming political. Ingrid, European advanced therapies companies often trade at significant discounts to their US peers, even with comparable science and clinical data. Is this purely about reimbursement uncertainty and smaller markets, or is there something about European business models and capital structures that make them fundamentally less attractive? And could that discount actually create opportunity?
I think that Laura already brought up some very valid points when she was talking about some of the difficulties that we see in Europe, right? But let's talk about a couple of things that I think are irrespective of geography that you brought up. I think first, European reimbursement uncertainty, fragmented markets, it is true, but it's true for everyone in the sector, right? Not only for European companies or for European funds. Everyone is facing the same difficulties. And secondly, I would say that I expect biotech to be very much fundamentally the same, irrespective of geography again, which is built for scientific excellence and following facts and data. So that fundamentally, I don't think it changes. I think the difference in valuation sometimes will come from the perceived execution risk, even though the science is pretty much an equivalent. So I think many European companies, they come sometimes already with a stereotype of, let's say, a less professional management team, for example, or sometimes it comes like with a little bit of, let's say, baggage, right? When they're not always built for capital market scalability from the first day. They will rely a little bit more on, they will have some more complex ownership structures, for example. There is some regional complexity on early stage financing that can come into play. They might rely a little bit more on funding that will limit their strategic flexibility in the future. So they just come with that a little bit extra level of difficulty. And I think that the discount can definitely be an opportunity when you're looking and comparing European versus US peers, just for the sake of this example. But I think it is an opportunity only for companies that can break this stereotype and that can break this little bit of baggage. I think for European teams that will professionalize already early on, they will think globally from day one. They can articulate a clear global strategy story. They're probably the ones that will be able to close this valuation gap a lot sooner.
Really, really interesting, Ingrid. And Ingrid, I'm going to stay with you for a slightly unscheduled additional follow-on question. You mentioned European companies sometimes having a little more baggage around them. And going back to Laura's point about one of the benefits of the companies that they are working on and starting up as having more government support, and even the government support we're seeing from other geographies. How do you think that's going to play in the future to the valuations and the complexity and the baggage for European companies? Do you think it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, or do you not think it's going to make a difference?
I would like to be optimistic and say that it will not make a difference. I think we need to start being more in favor of being open-minded about those kind of things and different ways of financing a company. It is a much healthier environment than just getting VCs financing pretty much anything early on. And the very classical capital market structure, right, that you see a lot for US companies is not necessarily the healthiest one. I think what Laura was describing on having some sort of different levels of financing already early on might allow you to just make progress and start building your story in just a little bit in a different way. But getting you to that next milestone without making the companies fully dependent on the next round of finance and the next round of finance. So I think when you put that on a scale, more money is better than no money that will put you on the hamster wheel that you have to find your next round. And that is actually will send companies towards unfriendly financing terms or a much more complex way. So I think that is actually a very positive thing.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's fantastic to hear, and it's great to hear that as we innovate, things are moving in the right direction. So brilliant. Right. Let's move on now to slightly later stage in development and think about the reimbursement challenges. So we're currently at a crossroads where the science of cures is outstripping the math of payment. With cell and gene therapies moving into massive indications like autoimmune, cardiometabolic diseases, et cetera, in 2025 and 26, the current $2 million odd per dose model is mathematically impossible for global healthcare budgets. So how do we think about this? And Ingrid, I'm going to stay with you here. Are we seeing launch failures not because the drugs don't work, but because the reimbursement takes 18 months plus to materialize? And at what point do you stop valuing a company based on its clinical pipeline and start valuing it based on its market access pipeline?
I think the market access build and pipeline, as you called, should be just pretty much parallel to your clinical development pipeline. Those things should be happening pretty much at the same time. It shouldn't be an afterthought, right? So if that's not happening, I actually think that some assets might deserve a little bit of valuation haircut if that is not already in place. No matter how good the data is, I think great data, great science with no access or no patients is just a very expensive optimism, right? It doesn't make any sense. So the two things should move at the same time. I think market access is not a downstream problem. It's a core value driver, and that's how we start seeing companies. And in the past, we saw commercialization being a pharma business, and the biotech investors would just want to see M&A as the exit strategy, right? The M&A used to be the thing fixing that access and market access risk. But now I think if we stop to look at M&A and deals again, as we were talking about JP Morgan, I think the multiples will actually discount, right? You pay less for a company if they have unresolved or complicated access issues. So pharma is not looking for a promise or hope. They're looking to shorten timelines, and they're looking for good access. So that becomes a lot more important. But to be fair, I'm very glad that we have been witnessing perception changing, and biotech has been bringing exceptional commercialization, actually, and vertical integration. So M&A is no longer the only exit strategy. And I think it just signals a healthier, more competitive ecosystem that at the end will just benefit all of us.
Oh, that's really exciting to hear. Really, really exciting. And hopefully a sign of biotech and specifically cell and gene therapies growing up. And, finally people starting to realize that the end point is not having a product approved, but rather having the product reimbursed and made available. Thank you for that. That's
Sven,
really great. Carol.
May I add to that a little bit? One of the things I was quite excited about that CIRM did last year on the public funds side is there's an expectation if they provide public funds that there's a reimbursement strategy, even in early phases. So it's interesting to see that that's even coming out of the public funds side of things.
Yeah, I think it's not the end of the day. You need to have its ability to translate innovation and science into patient access. And if you don't have those two things going together, then what is the point really of what we are doing? So yeah, no longer don't think that you're going to be acquired by pharma at the end of the day, because that is not the main thing anymore. But I think that's quite the opposite.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And I think, this really speaks to some of the discussions that we as investors, and I know, speaking to Lara also, has had this when we speak to very early stage companies. It's not a stage of, you've got great science. Woohoo! There are a lot of
I think we lost Sven. I did. I don't know if you all lost Sven.
We lost him.
Yes,
Yes.
we lost we lost Sven, but maybe you what he was going to say, you can pick it up, Laura, which is the VCs want that. Oh,
Now
he's back.
I think.
He's back. But
sorry, everybody. My hotel internet is a little unstable. Anyway, so I'm going to carry on as if nothing happened. and just ignore the elephant in the room. So Miguel, let's move over to you. We're moving from ultra-orphan diseases to indications with, much larger numbers of patients, potentially into the millions. Can you realistically achieve a 10 times reduction in cost of goods to satisfy payers and compete with small molecules? Or is the current blue chip investment model fundamentally incompatible with the low margin, high volume reality of mass market cell therapies?
Yeah. Tagging on to the previous discussion, you need to develop the products with the commercial reality. And essential to this is not just the commercialization, but the business model. And the business model needs to be suited to the product, the disease, the cost of goods, all of that. The end in mind, with a comprehensive business model, which is different from an autologous product to the in vivo to the allogeneic. And so I do believe several things. I do believe that we will have an improvement in cost of goods within each of the models, and we will have shift from one to the other. Give an example. If you have a certain indication that you can do with an ex vivo autologous gene engineered versus that you can do the same thing with in vivo, you're going to have an optimization of cost there, and thereby changing business model. But within the business model, you will reduce the cost of goods. You suit the product to the business model and the business model to the product. So I do have a strong belief that we're going to address this in multiple ways, making sure that we're able to scale the number of patients we treat. Because like most of the new technologies, they start in small patients because the risk is more acceptable, but also the technology is suited to indications with small patients, but we will grow to larger patients, adapting the business model to the target indication.
Fascinating. Thank you, Miguel. Really, really interesting. And I think, lots more discussion to be had on this topic about, how do we ensure that there's appropriate cost of goods and value from cell and gene therapies, particularly in indications that are really well met by small molecules. Is that a fight we should be taking on, or should we be staying closer to our lane? So maybe that's something for a future session.
Sure.
So
for sure,
Laura, let's come to you. As VCs pivot their company investment and building strategy from ultra rare diseases into mass market or much larger market indications, and we've mentioned previously autoimmune and cardiometabolic, they're moving from a lack of treatment market into a displacing existing therapies market. So when you're looking at a seed or a Series A company, how much does the therapeutic projected ease of administration, so things like inpatient versus outpatient, hospital stay, etc., and the likely cost of goods outweigh the raw clinical efficacy in your valuation? So specifically, are you now intentionally avoiding best-in-class science as it lacks a clear right to win in a 2030 commercial environment dominated by low-friction competitors like GLP-1s or small molecule degraders?
So the reality is that we've always avoided best-in-class, and we exclusively invest in first-in-class. But this is also because we are early-stage investors, and we think that our place is to lead the wave, not to follow it. So for us, it's not about being somewhat better. So, for instance, in the 2020-2021 rush on investing on cell and gene therapy, we decided to not invest in CD19s or BCMAs. We invested in novel targets in the CAR-T space, or we invested in novel platforms, like in vivo platforms, but we avoided the crowded spaces because it was really unclear if there would be any space at all for all of these marginal improvements. So we think that focusing in new mechanisms, it's very important for us. And of course, we take into consideration administration cost of goods, but the reality as early stage investors is that it is unfair to ask to the company to have it all clear from the beginning. But the important thing is to have a credible path to cost reduction. For instance, exploring rapid manufacturing, maybe automated processes, or even having the possibility to move to in vivo. And maybe one last thought, and I think it was in connection to what you were previously saying, Sven, is we are more and more cautious with platforms that are looking for a problem. So there was a lot of hype about very innovative platforms, but they were not built thinking about the problem. They were built because they were elegant, no? But we really want, when we looked into technology, and we love investing in platforms, but we always want to see that it's really designed to solve a clinical or a commercial need, not just because the technology is scientifically interesting.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, sorry, Sven, if I may add, I
Of
think
course.
it's a very good point that Laura made. And I just wanted to say, this is efficient capital allocation as well. We cannot be spending our money on incremental innovations. I think we can leave it to our tech colleagues to solve problems that don't exist, right? We can just focus on doing the things that actually needs doing. It's just that there is a clinical issue, there is a patient need. We can't keep putting money towards incremental things that's not a healthy financial ecosystem.
Yeah, really interesting. That sort of brings me back to one of my old bosses always used to say, perfect is the enemy of good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And we should just be pragmatic and getting these therapies out to patients. Really great. Thank you both. Carol, let's come to you now. In the US, we're starting to see onshoring move from a political talking point to a real source of financial leverage, primarily through incentives, procurement priorities, and public-private partnerships. So from a commercial standpoint, how are these policy shifts changing where cell and gene therapy companies can realistically find non-dilutive or strategic capital? And what are the biggest mistakes you see companies making when they're trying to align themselves with federal priorities?
No, that's a great question. A little bit loaded question, too.
A little bit controversial.
A little controversial. Well, I think last year, 25 was a roller coaster for most people. I think we certainly had clients that had programs staged early on in 25. But, we saw some really good, I'd say, reports out. The Embody program is one that's an ARPA grant that ultimately went to, Immunovie, Tessera, and then Cytiva actually got a nice piece there, with really the bets being laid down for in vivo cell therapy programs, which I thought that was really good show of support last year. I think the focus on the FDA's level of collaboration, I think, also shows some ability to free up the regulatory environment a bit, or at least make it more collaborative. Obviously, that has capital impact, of course. We also had last year the GIVE ARPA program that was launched. It's really focused on genetic medicines and individualized manufacturing. The folks that we partnered with to kind of look at that program, it really favors big leaps in advanced technology, and some of these programs are not geared for near-term patient access benefit. And I caution people on chasing some of these things too far. They are very resource intensive for companies. The probability is, can be favorable, but the duration of time it might take to actually see those funds move is really, a TBD. It's very volatile right now. So I think there's definitely some programs out there that people can take advantage of and continue to lean in to ARPA and other agencies that are providing funding programs. But I would caution people behind putting all your eggs in that basket, for sure. And I do think we have to not necessarily react to the volatility that we see, but rather, the trends. So I'm going to be very much leaning into 26 and seeing how some of these programs truly get funded. I guess that's the big question right now. Will these programs truly get funded? And until we see that money really move, I think people should be guarded about how much time they spend on these programs.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. And maybe just in addition, I just want to give a shout out to yesterday's announcement about the PRVs being reinstated.
Yes.
So, pediatric review voucher, wow,
Yes.
fantastic, long awaited. So really, really, fantastic move there from the agency. So I'm going to stay with you, Carol, for the next question, and then ask any of the panelists who'd like to come in after that. So there's a lot of talk on this panel about where capital's flowing, and we've discussed this quite a lot, but less about who actually knows how to catch it. So it's that little bit of mercury that's flowing around on the table that we're all trying to catch. So based on your experience navigating both the US onshoring incentives as well as international backed investments, what really separates companies that are successfully able to capture these pools from those that watch them go by?
It's an incredible business development lift. So I think that having people on your team that actually know how to navigate the complexities of government funding. I know even on my own team, I have someone that is an expert in how to navigate the layers, the complexities in funding. I mean, there may actually be a central bank piece that has to be involved when you look at how the funding moves for some of these programs. So I think that if you are truly going to go after some of these funds, have that expertise either in-house or have good consultants or firms that know how to navigate how to get to those funds and the thresholds for requirements to actually access those funds, because there are some specific things you have to know and navigate wherever you are.
Interesting. Any thoughts from anyone else? I know, Laura, you guys do a lot with your non-dilutive funding, and Ingrid, I know you and Miguel have also had experience with the European Investment Bank.
Yeah, sure. So maybe on my end, we use both national and European, and we apply for both grants. At the national level, there are some public-private, let's say funding for public-private collaborations that are super useful, especially in the early stage. But then at the European level, we most of our companies have applied for the EIC accelerator. This is a beautiful program, and we've got it for some of the companies. But the reality is that it's getting more and more complicated to get it, because the threshold and the stage of development that you need to get access to has moved. So initially it was more at preclinical stage, and now they are asking for almost be at the clinical stage. And that's been really an issue for a lot of companies, because the gap is precisely before entering the clinics. So if I can use this as well for a call for action, I would say that the EIC should be a little bit more flexible and accept proposals in the preclinical stage, because this is where the gap is, not at the clinical stage.
If I can jump in here very quickly, Laura, you're absolutely right. And actually, that's the discussion that is going on between the European Commission and the European Parliament on early stage flexible investment to really bridge that desert, which is idea to clinical data. Because once you've got clinical data, there's already mechanisms and there's already VC intention to invest. It's really bring that idea to fruition that needs investment. And within the European Biotech Act, the European Investment Bank has already made commitments to go that way, and money has already been set aside that way. So for sure, hopefully, it will happen.
Ingrid, any thoughts from your side and your experiences?
No, not really. I think it touches maybe back a little bit into, I think, some of the other questions that we had in the chat earlier today, and I think a lot of what we discussed is about risk and the different levels of risk aversion. I think there isn't necessarily a profile of companies that I see that have access. Okay, it's a clear cut, this kind of company, this kind of company. I think it depends on the risk appetite of the moment. And I don't think it's easy for companies themselves to always have that assessment, because you are into your own business and into your own sector. You're not seeing the helicopter view on where the risk is at the moment. So I would just reinforce what Carol said, that I think it's time sometimes to reach out for help for those that can assist you with that. As a consultancy company, either a bank that you're talking to, that can be really helpful, because as a company, you can't necessarily have the kind of view on where to go or where to do at all times. You have your own business to run. I think that's something that you can leverage outside help more than anything else.
Yeah, really, really interesting, and thank you for that. I think that makes a lot of sense, and we're getting back to the collaboration. I know from our perspective also, looking at getting funding of support from AMED in Japan, the Japanese government. So similar kind of thing. Many companies are not very experienced at doing it, and so we have folks on staff who that's kind of what they do, and we have an AMED whisperer, we call him, who can really help and support companies getting through. So it's about using the expertise and using the people around you. Okay, so
maybe
yes, Laura.
adding to that, just one thing, that of course we use providers to support, not only because of the complexity of the filing of the grant, but the justification. And one thing that we also discuss in a lot of different forums is the earlier stage financing should be as flexible as possible. And this is not always the case, because I understand that this is public money, but at the same time, these are earlier stage companies that might pivot and they might change indications, that might change other things. So flexibility and also quick responses would be really appreciated.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, is that flexibility and that ability to change as we go, because it's early stage. Okay, so we're now getting into the last few minutes, and we've had a couple of questions come in. So I'm going to take one that Georgie's kindly pushed up here from Sonka. So I'm going to read it to you guys, and then whoever wants to jump in and answer it. So the pipelines, knowledge, experience, management, and chance to come to approve are better than ever before. Still, the investors de-risk or want de-risking and hesitate. How does this fit? Is it because of more competition from other modalities, such as biologics, TCE, etc.? And what could be the strategy for cell and gene therapy companies related to this? So, Laura, as the early stage investor, shall I give you the microphone first, and then we'll go to the other panelists?
Yeah, sure. Maybe one thing that we are seeing in terms of trends of investment is that we've seen a lot of very big funds closing with huge volumes. So they have bigger tickets, and bigger tickets means bigger rounds, but of course they need less technical risk, right? And that is why a lot of investors are waiting for almost clinical stage to invest the big bucks, right? So there is an issue there, because of course we need early stage investments to push the pipeline, and then these big investors come in. That's on the one hand, and maybe on the other hand, is we as an industry, we are seeing a lot of platforms that do not really differentiate. And sometimes that is why we hesitate. It's because it is super difficult to distinguish between one platform and the other that do exactly the same, just slightly better at the preclinical level, right? So how do we really distinguish? So unless you have a very disruptive and very good USP, for us, it's another platform with similar data. And this is also happening in the in vivo space, right? I mean, there was investments, there were M&As, and now there are many companies trying to do in vivo, but they are doing more or less the same that the ones that have already been acquired. So unless you go to the next challenge, or it is going to be difficult to get funding, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, really, really interesting. And I think we're seeing the same thing. And you hinted at this, when you talked about back in 2021, thinking about specifically not investing in yet another CD19 or a BCMA car. Okay, so we've got one more quick question from Stephen Sullivan, and I kind of like this one, so I want to ask it before we do the wrap up. So Stephen asks, what forecasts do the panel have for biotech investments in the US, Europe, and Canada, China in 26 to 3030, and what's driving any of these changes? So a nice big one. I'm going to ask you guys for brief answers. Miguel, I'm going to start with you, and then Carol, and then Ingrid, and then Laura.
I think we're going to see investment on lower risk supported data, but I also going to see more and more based on that commercial and that business model. I hope to see trickling into earlier stage as well, but I would say probably to the latter more.
Fantastic. Thank you. Carol.
I think that global collaboration piece is going to be growing more than ever, maybe beyond even what we're thinking today. We talked a little bit about China and the Middle East. I think that the expectation for global markets is going to get stronger.
Wonderful. Ingrid.
I'm sorry to say that, but I agree with Miguel. I think lower risk and bigger tickets, I would say, if we can judge by the consolidation of the investment community as well, we need to invest bigger and bigger checks. So that's my 5 cents.
Cool. Laura.
I agree with all of you. Maybe I would go that technology side. So I hope we see more investments in better delivery vehicles, because we are not there yet. So AAVs are having issues. In vivo, of course, it needs to improve. So hopefully we get better delivery vehicles, and then we can expand gene and cell therapy beyond specific indications.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's wonderful, everyone. So I think, today we've learned that 2026 is likely to be a complex mix of breakthroughs and bottlenecks. We've learned that the blueprint for success has shifted. It's no longer enough to have a proprietary secret sauce, and the real winners will be those who can standardize, decentralize, drive down COGS by an order of magnitude, and meet the demands of mass market indications. The investor message is one of disciplined optimism. The mega rounds are back, but they are very highly selective. Capital is no longer chasing just good science, it's chasing great medicines. The bottleneck isn't a lack of cash, it's a high bar for market access, the logistical reality of treating millions and not dozens. We need to grow up, we need to grow up fast. If there's one big takeaway from today, it's that we're in the middle of a great transition. We're moving from the era of bespoke miracles to the era of standardized cures. Whether the current investment map becomes a blueprint for a trillion-dollar industry or a bottleneck that stifles innovation depends entirely on our ability to align our manufacturing logic with clinical ambitions and collaborate internationally. The money's there, the science is there, but the bridge between them is still under construction. So with that, I'd like to thank Carol, Miguel, Laura, and Ingrid for helping us map the way forward. And of course, to our audience for your engagement, your questions, and your thoughts. And then a huge, huge thanks to our sponsor, BCA Advanced Therapies Networks, for supporting these discussions on a regular basis. Just to remind you, the session is part of a much larger conversation, and we need to carry it forward. This is not the end. This is just the start. Cell and gene therapies hold the promise for transformation, but without affordability, that promise remains out of touch. If you'd like to learn more and register for future sessions, or even contribute ideas and subscribe to our mailing list, please visit us at www.advancedtherapiesthinktank.com and follow us on LinkedIn. So until next time, challenge convention, build transparency, Let's get these therapies where they belong, to the patients who need them, and let's not forget to collaborate internationally. So to everyone for joining me on the panel, thank you so much for your time. To everyone in the audience, thank you very much for your comments, engagement, thoughts, questions, and comments. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.